Hello everybody. In this screencast we're going to look at performing segues programmatically. So in the previous examples we showed you how to connect a button through the storyboard to trigger a segue to go to another view controller. But what if you want to do this programmatically, meaning you want to trigger the segue programmatically? Let's assume the segue exists, but we want to trigger it programmatically. The idea is pretty simple. If you look at the segue, this is the example we used. This is the example where we tied the segue to the button click. And if you click on the segue, you could see that the segue has an identifier. Let's say we call it our first segue. So basically this first segue is a segue that's connected to this button. When you click on this button, it goes to the yellow view controller. If you look at the code there is no code. It's just all handled through the storyboard. So now we run this. Nothing new. We have seen this before. Basically what's going to happen is going to show you the red one. You click here, go to the yellow one, and we close, it closes the yellow one. Okay, cool. So now can I trigger this programmatically? Meaning, can I trigger this segue programmatically? Yes. Basically, if you go to the view controller that manages the red view controller, basically there is a method called perform segue, self.perform segue. But you could see that perform segue is expecting a segue identifier. All you have to do is just call perform segue, specify the identifier, and the sender is self, which is this current view controller, and then boom, that would actually cause the segue to happen. Okay. So basically, let's say to test this, let's have another button that I'm not going to wire up. I'm not going to wire up through the. I'm not going to wire up a segue through it in the storyboard. Instead, I'll just do that in code. So basically, I'll go here, create a button. Okay, I'll call it, say for example, segue programmatically. All right, so here it is. You can set some constraints and so on. Maybe we go vertical spacing, and then give it a horizontal container, center and horizontally. So anyway, so when you click on this button, I want to go here, but I'm not going to wire it up through the storyboard. If I wire it to the storyboard, I'll press Control and go here. That wires it to the storyboard. I'm not going to do that. Okay. Instead, I'm going to go here and go to the code and create an action when I click that button. Okay. Here's an action for that button. I'll say button clicked. And then basically all I'm going to do is I'm going to say self.perform segue, specify the identifier, and then the sender is self. The question is that what is the identifier for that segue? Also straightforward. This is the segue. Its identifier is first segue. If there's no identifier, you specify an identifier. Okay. Go here. So basically all I'm doing is that I wired up this button. When you click the button, it triggers this function, and I'll just call self.perform segue. Okay, so when you run it, now the segue programmatically is going to trigger the performing of the segue programmatically here, and the segue happens programmatically. Another thing to pay attention to is that what if do I have to have the segue to be wired directly to a button? Like for example, this segue is already wired to a button. Can I make it wired to the view controller? Yes, I can do that. How do I wire a segue to the view controller, which is not triggered by a click of a button? Is basically here. If I click on the yellow and I click on control and press control and maintain the press, and then you drag from this circle to here, you create a segue. And if you look here, the first segue that we have is connected to the button. The second segue that we have is actually connected to the view controller. To trigger that segue, we have to give it a name. Let's say we call it the second. Okay, we call it the second. So instead of first, I'll call it second. The second segue. Okay, so you can see the first segue is wired up to the button. The second segue is wired up to the view controller. So let's say when we click the programmatically button, it goes to the yellow through using the second segue which we just created, which we specified its identifier here. How do we do that? We go back again to the view controller file. Instead of first, I'll just say it's the second now. It's the second segue. Okay, we'll call it second. Oops. Okay, so basically now we are triggering the second segue, which is not actually wired to the button. It's wired to the view controller. Okay, programmatically and close. So we've shown you some interesting details related to segues. Basically, how to wire up segues through how to fire segues programmatically, and how to assign the segue to the view controller instead of a component. I hope this was helpful. Please let us know if you have any questions. Thank you.